Sedersi di farlo velocemente. Io sono Dario Fabbri, consigliere scientifico responsabile per gli Stati Uniti di Limes. Sarò moderatore di questo panel, di questa nostra conferenza dedicata al contesto mondiale, cioè vogliamo partire questa mattina occupandoci in un festival tutto dedicato ad una strategia per l'Italia, anzitutto dal contesto mondiale in cui l'Italia è collocata, capire nel caso specifico di questo nostro panel quali sono i rapporti fra le tre principali potenze del pianeta, per poi sviluppare nel corso dei giorni, cioè oggi e domani, come questi rapporti, non soltanto questi, ovviamente si riverberano sulla situazione italiana. Questa mattina ne parliamo con tre ospiti di grande livello che sono venuti a trovarci proprio per spiegarci la posizione dei loro rispettivi paesi, in particolare Jacob Shapiro, che è capo analista di Geopolitical Futures, me l'ha suggerito e quindi uso la sua dizione, il Limes americano, l'ha definito così, cioè la rivista che è corrispondente all'Imes negli Stati Uniti, sebbene soltanto online nel suo caso. Poi a fianco a me vedete il professor Yu Ji, che è invece ovviamente un analista, un professore cinese dell'Università di Macao, e invece alla mia sinistra l'ospite russo che è venuto a trovarci questa mattina, Dmitry Suslov, che è vice direttore del Dipartimento per Studi Europei della Higher School of Economics di Mosca. Insieme a loro, con due diversi round, con due diverse sessioni di interventi, in particolare una prima sessione da 15 minuti ciascuno, in cui proveranno a spiegare da un lato Jacob Shapiro qual è l'atteggiamento statunitense nei confronti della Cina, quindi da parte del nostro ospite cinese, viceversa, i rapporti visti da Pechino nei confronti degli Stati Uniti. Invece Dmitry Suslov ci parlerà dei rapporti tra Stati Uniti e Russia. Ci sarà una seconda sessione al termine di questi 15 minuti, da 10 minuti ciascuno, in cui gli altri tratteranno semplicemente del paese di cui non si sono occupati nella prima sessione, quindi Shapiro si occuperà delle relazioni tra Stati Uniti e Russia, il professor Yu si occuperà invece delle relazioni tra Russia e Cina e lo stesso farà il professor Suslov. A me all'inizio invece il compito di introdurre gli argomenti di cui poi i nostri autorevoli speaker si occuperanno, ovvero spiegare quali possono essere ad oggi alcune categorie fondamentali, alcune strutture fondamentali del rapporto fra queste tre grandi potenze a livello planetario, anche cercando di disegnare una gerarchia fra di loro, e questo è certamente più semplice, ma cercando di capire anche dove vanno le relazioni tra queste tre potenze. Alle mie spalle vedete questa carta che qualche tempo fa peraltro è stata la carta principale che presentammo proprio qui a Genova in un festival di Limes, la carta che rappresenta l'impero americano. L'abbiamo detto più volte, vale la pena ripeterlo anche in questa occasione. Impero in geopolitica non ha un'accezione negativa, ideologica, è semplicemente considerato uno stato di fatto. Nel caso specifico vedete disegnato l'impero americano nella sua struttura primaria, primordiale, ovvero il controllo dei mari e degli oceani. Gli Stati Uniti sono, come su Limes spieghiamo molto spesso, una potenza talassocratica che quindi si basa sul controllo dei mari e degli oceani attraverso, nello specifico, il controllo dei cosiddetti choke points, cioè dei colli di bottiglia attraverso i quali è necessario passare per il commercio mondiale, quindi dagli stretti agli istmi che punteggiano il nostro planisfero, e attraverso questo controllo tutt'oggi incontrastato, quindi in un periodo, in un momento storico che ci sembra di straordinaria trasformazione e cambiamento, anche di caos, secondo le interpretazioni più diffuse. Se c'è qualcosa che ancora non muta in nessuna maniera è questa carta che vedete alle mie spalle, cioè il controllo americano dei mari e degli oceani. Ma che tipo di momento vive, questo è il piano strategico, ma sul piano tattico, che tipo di momento vivono gli Stati Uniti, che tipo di momento vive ancora quella che è l'unica superpotenza globale del pianeta, cioè Washington? Se dovessimo semplificare, gli Stati Uniti hanno in questa fase un atteggiamento di ostilità pressoché parallela nei confronti delle altre due principali potenze del pianeta, ovvero Cina come numero 2 e Russia come numero 3. Se volessimo aggiungere a queste anche un numero 4, cioè la Germania, nei confronti della quale ancora hanno a loro volta un atteggiamento di ostilità anche nei confronti di Berlino, in questo momento gli Stati Uniti, gli americani vivono una fase in cui non stanno cercando l'appoggio, la sponda di una di queste potenze nei confronti del loro principale avversario, semplificando la sponda russa contro la Cina, che dovrebbe essere considerata dagli Stati Uniti, e lo è molto probabilmente, il principale sfidante all'egemonia, alla primazia americana, ma mantengono, dicevo, un atteggiamento di ostilità parallelo nei confronti sia della Russia che della Cina. L'IMES era stato in questo senso preveggente, soltanto pochi mesi prima dell'elezione di Trump dedicammo un numero a quella che definimmo la pace impossibile tra Russia e Stati Uniti. Pensavamo fosse necessario in quel momento, visto che la classica distorsione per cui si crede il presidente americano capace di dettare non solo la tattica, e già questo sarebbe abbastanza improbabile, ma addirittura la strategia degli Stati Uniti, qualcuno si divertiva in maniera più o meno ingenua a credere che gli americani si sarebbero sciolti in sensi amorosi con i russi. Questo ovviamente non è avvenuto, almeno non è ancora avvenuto. Gli Stati Uniti, nonostante tentativi evidenti da parte della presidenza americana, a partire da Bush figlio, ricorderete quando Bush figlio vide negli occhi di Putin la democrazia, quello fu una sorta di innamoramento platonico, passando per Obama. Anche Obama, esattamente come Trump, aveva in testa l'intenzione di aprire a Mosca, cioè di utilizzare la Russia in funzione anticinese, non fosse altro che gli apparati, cioè le agenzie federali che poi si occupano materialmente di politica estera, ma non soltanto, il Congresso, cioè il Parlamento statunitense in forma trasversale, mantengono un'ostilità nei confronti della Russia che non ha consentito in questi anni di tramutare lo scontro, che ormai risale alla Seconda Guerra Mondiale, alla fase successiva della Seconda Guerra Mondiale, tramutarlo in un'intesa in funzione anti-Repubblica Popolare, per molteplici ragioni, alcune evidentemente ideologiche, cioè non è semplice passare anche sul piano della pedagogia nazionale, dall'aver indicato un villano, peraltro molto utile, e che ha il physique du rôle per esserlo come la Russia, dicevo, tramutarlo in un interlocutore paritario, comunque di dignità tale da poterci trattare. Allo stesso modo, in forma più utilitaristica, la Russia serve anche perché è una minaccia più comprensibile, proprio per la pedagogia nazionale di cui sopra, non soltanto all'opinione pubblica statunitense, ma agli stessi politici americani, e che è certamente funzionale ed efficiente quando gli apparati, cioè il Pentagono su tutti, chiedono un aumento del suo bilancio ed utilizzano anche, non soltanto la Cina, ma anche lo spauracchio della crescita militare russa come ragione di un aumento del budget in sé. E ancora, e questo è un fattore di altrettanta importanza, la Russia serve a coagulare intorno a Washington le nazioni dell'Europa centro-orientale che altrimenti non avrebbero negli Stati Uniti il loro principale interlocutore. Nazioni che, tranne alcune rare eccezioni, sono tendenzialmente russofobe, quindi vedono nella Russia, anche ingigantendone la portata, un pericolo di primaria importanza, che quindi si rifugiano oppure provano a rifugiarsi sotto la gonna della superpotenza, nel caso americano, e quindi raccontare la Russia come un interlocutore impresentabile, o comunque con chi è impossibile in questo momento raggiungere una forma di accordo, serve a mantenere a fianco agli Stati Uniti quella che Donald Rumsfeld, il vecchio segretario alla difesa ai tempi di Bush figlio, chiamava la nuova Europa, e che è certamente utile agli Stati Uniti. Quindi viviamo un momento in cui l'America mantiene un'ostilità evidente nei confronti tanto della Cina quanto della Russia, e come dicevo, se volessimo aggiungere all'equazione anche la Germania, c'entrerebbe molto facilmente anche la Germania, visto il rapporto complesso che esiste oggi tra Washington e Berlino. Ma come vedete dalla carta alle mie spalle, come tutte le carte dell'IMES realizzata da Laura Canali, gli Stati Uniti in questa fase si concentrano sulla sfida non soltanto economica, cioè sulla controglobalizzazione in salsa cinese, che è rappresentata dalle nuove vie della seta, dal progetto che è tanto terrestre quanto marittimo delle nuove vie della seta. Nella prima carta che abbiamo vista, quella dell'impero americano, cioè il controllo degli oceani e dei mari da parte statunitense, abbiamo notato l'embrione di ciò che noi chiamiamo globalizzazione, quindi il controllo dei mari e degli oceani, lì dove passa il 90% delle merci globali, come fondamenta della globalizzazione per come la conosciamo. Questa alle mie spalle, come ben sapete, è il tentativo cinese di produrre un'alternativa alla globalizzazione statunitense, inizialmente e soprattutto per ragioni strutturali o di deficienza strutturale della Cina, quindi la necessità di aumentare le esportazioni, di smaltire una parte del surplus industriale cinese, non soltanto, di collegare l'entroterra della Repubblica Popolare alla costa, che è nettamente più luminosa, ma è evidente che in questa idea c'è un'ambizione puramente geopolitica anche e ben oltre i confini della Repubblica Popolare. C'è un progetto di costruzione di infrastrutture che dovrebbe collegare, in parte lo fa già, la Repubblica Popolare all'Europa e non soltanto, passando anche per l'Oceano Indiano fino al Medio Oriente o al Nord Africa, in una funzione futura oggi non ancora immaginata, ma che certamente non si può escludere. Tutto questo che cosa significa ad occhi americani? Il tentativo di insidiare la supremazia statunitense e quindi la necessità in questi anni perseguita da Washington di colpire lo sviluppo industriale, soprattutto industriale, della Cina, interpretata da Trump per ragioni personali, elettorali, come il tentativo di diminuire il surplus commerciale statunitense, quindi qualcosa di meno importante nella vicenda generale, non fosse altro che in questi anni il surplus commerciale statunitense è inevitabilmente aumentato. Anche qui l'IME sarà stato un facile profeta nel spiegare che sarebbe aumentato, e questo è successo, quanto in maniera più concreta, quindi ciò che va oltre le intenzioni di Trump, la necessità di colpire lo sviluppo industriale e tecnologico cinese, un'interpretazione americana che vede nella Cina un paese in questa fase in transizione, prossimo a delle difficoltà strutturali che dovrebbero rendere perlomeno incerta la sua traiettoria, difficoltà strutturali che il paese potrebbe superare, ma che gli Stati Uniti vogliono ingigantire, colpire per allentarne lo sviluppo, cioè la sensazione che Xi Jinping si sia arrogato poteri straordinari perché percepisce la necessità nel breve e medio periodo di dover intervenire all'interno del paese, soprattutto per redistribuire ricchezza, ad esempio, tra una costa che, come è capitato più volte nella storia cinese, è straordinariamente luminosa, straordinariamente progredita, come in questa fase, ed un entroterra del paese che invece ha ancora livelli di arretratezza molto gravi, che in una fase di difficoltà come quella che potrebbe colpire l'economia cinese nei prossimi anni potrebbe causare addirittura una spaccatura o perlomeno un rischio di spaccatura all'interno del paese. Gli americani vogliono diminuire la capacità cinese di risolvere queste incongruenze, cui si aggiunge anche il tentativo cinese di sviluppare una marina militare che possa essere in grado di insidiare anche qui il controllo dei mari statunitensi, che, come abbiamo visto fin dall'inizio di questo mio intervento, è l'elemento primario della supremazia statunitense. Per capire il rapporto di forze che ancora intercorre tra Stati Uniti e Cina, in questa fase la Cina cerca di uscire di casa, cioè è impegnata a controllare i propri mari rivieraschi, cioè i mari su cui si affaccia direttamente. Anche qui comprendiamo l'atteggiamento sempre offensivo degli Stati Uniti e sempre difensivo dei loro interlocutori, cioè dei rapporti di forza nettamente sbilanciati in favore di Washington, anche se forse qualcuno ha la sensazione di vivere una fase quasi capovolta da questo punto di vista, con la Cina che prova a controllare i mari antistanti anche con la costruzione di isolotti artificiali, e gli Stati Uniti che invece vogliono garantire quella che chiamano in maniera ideologica e propagandistica la libertà di navigazione, che altro non è che ricordare la possibilità di soffocamento che pende sulla testa della Cina, e questo invece, lo vedete alle mie spalle, è il contenimento, quest'arco di contenimento che gli americani pensano di realizzare con l'aiuto di alleati che sul piano geopolitico la Cina ancora mancano, ma che invece ha sul piano economico nella regione, e che, nonostante gli straordinari rapporti commerciali che intrattengono con la Repubblica Popolare, ne percepiscono allo stesso tempo la pericolosità, e per questo si avvicinano all'America, alla superpotenza. In conclusione, alle mie spalle vedete invece il rapporto fra Stati Uniti e Cina, di cui si occuperanno Jacob Shapiro e Dmitry Suslov dopo di me nella seconda fase dei nostri interventi. Gli Stati Uniti si mantengono in questa fase, ce lo dirà la storia, se per leggerezza, per scelleratezza, oppure perché consapevoli di non averne bisogno, in posizione di ostilità parallela, tanto nei confronti della Cina quanto nei confronti della Russia Russia della quale perseguono il contenimento ancora oggi, dopo aver spostato la stessa linea di contenimento da Berlino di fatto al Donbass, quindi dall'ex Repubblica Democratica Tedesca fino alla regione più orientale dell'Ucraina, quindi con un soffocamento che è andato allargandosi nettamente ai danni della Russia e che, come spiegato all'inizio, considerano nettamente funzionale, e allo stesso tempo invece mantengono l'ostilità nei confronti della Cina. Da ultimissimo un passaggio molto veloce sulla Corea del Nord, che è un'altra variabile che si è inserita inevitabilmente in questo triangolo tra le tre principali potenze. Dallo scorso inverno, diciamo tra dicembre 2017 e gennaio 2018, al di là di tutto ciò che ascolterete sui tentativi di denuclearizzazione perseguita da Washington nei confronti della Corea del Nord, gli Stati Uniti hanno accettato che la Corea del Nord sia un paese nucleare. Questo è certamente un grande cambiamento nei rapporti che riguardano non soltanto ma soprattutto Stati Uniti e Cina. Cioè gli Stati Uniti sono impegnati in questa fase non a denuclearizzare la Corea del Nord, semplicemente perché se potessero ovviamente lo farebbero, ma non hanno intenzione di fare la guerra a Pyongyang per questa ragione. Sono consapevoli che Kim Jong-un non ha nessuna intenzione di suicidarsi e quindi non rinuncerà mai all'arma atomica, ma in cambio di concessioni scenografiche da parte del regime, cioè la distruzione ad esempio ad uso di telecamere di una parte minima del suo arsenale, piuttosto che di alcune più o meno dismesse centrali nucleari di cui si conosce a malapena l'esistenza, in cambio di tutto questo gli Stati Uniti vogliono invece, ed è questo l'obiettivo centrale, attirare verso di sé la Corea del Nord con elargizioni e con seduzioni di tipo economico-commerciale per sottrarla, almeno parzialmente, si intende, all'influenza cinese, incontrando in questo sì il favore di Kim Jong-un, che vuole giocare inevitabilmente su due tavoli. Questo si inserisce l'elemento della Corea del Nord in maniera preponderante nelle relazioni tra Stati Uniti e Cina, non soltanto perché i cinesi, così come i russi, sono molto contenti di vedere gli americani attardarsi sulla questione della Corea del Nord e quindi distrarsi parzialmente nella vicenda nordcoreana, perché non dobbiamo dimenticare che la Corea del Nord è per gli Stati Uniti il tentativo di tramutare il contenimento che avete visto poco fa con l'arco di respingimento in bianco, che è soprattutto e quasi esclusivamente marittimo da parte americana ai danni della Cina, in un contenimento che sia anche terrestre, cioè arrivare letteralmente, oggi è fantascienza, ma in futuro non si può certamente escludere, ed è un obiettivo che gli americani tengono in testa, arrivare al fiume Yalu, cioè al confine fra Corea del Nord e Cina, mettendo i piedi letteralmente sull'uscio della Repubblica Popolare. Tutto questo per darvi un quadro generale dei rapporti fra le tre grandi potenze del pianeta, il numero 1, il numero 2 e il numero 3. Io mi fermo qui, lascio la parola a Jacob Shapiro che, con una prospettiva inevitabilmente statunitense, ci spiega anzitutto che cosa sta capitando tra Washington e Pechino. Grazie.
Good morning, buongiorno. I want to start by thanking the translators in advance. They have told me that I need to speak very slowly for them, and I promise that I will try. That's the best that I can do. I also want to start off by thanking Lucio. I want to thank Dario. I want to thank the entire Limes team for having me. I travel a lot, and I speak at a lot of conferences throughout the course of the year throughout the world. And this conference is exceptional. It is not often that experts like us get to talk to a room full of interested people who would spend their Saturday wanting to get smarter, wanting to get more intelligent about what's going on in the world. So it's a real privilege for me to be here, and thank you to all of you for being here as well. Dario, at one point you mentioned in your excellent introduction that we have a confrontation in the United States with China and with Russia and maybe even with Germany. I hope not with Germany. I hope that we can just call that a disagreement for now. I hope that we don't need confrontations with all countries that we disagree with. And I'll get back to that in a second. So let me start by congratulating Italy for deciding to join the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a big moment for Italy. I come from the United States, and I come from Texas in the United States, and I wish that Texas would join the Belt and Road Initiative too. You see, we have big trucks and big hats and big guns and all the things that you think about Americans, and the traffic is terrible, and our ports are falling apart, and if the Chinese are listening, it would be great. We could use some new ports and some new railroads. We'll take your money. In all seriousness, though, Belt and Road does pose a challenge to the United States, but I don't think that it's the challenge that everybody is thinking about or even talking about. So I'm going to try to explain a little bit what I think that challenge is, and then I'll get back to that point at the end of what I say. I always like to look back at history when I'm understanding what's going on in the world today. And right now, I think that the United States is facing a number of the same challenges that the British Empire faced in the 19th century. If you look at the British economy in the beginning of the 1800s, debt was ballooning. They were spending like crazy. Their debt to GDP ratio by 1820 was around 250% of GDP. For some frame of reference, the United States has only just crossed 100% of debt to GDP. We have a lot more debt to rack up before we get there. At the same time, Britain had a tremendously powerful navy, and it was a tremendously powerful trading partner, but it was running into massive trade deficits with this huge exporting country in the Far East. And of course, that country is China. So what did Great Britain do about this? Great Britain fought the Opium Wars in order to make sure that China had trade policies that were preferential to Great Britain. I also noticed that in the 1800s, British society underwent a transformation. This was the Victorian era. It was prudish, it was very conservative, it was very nationalist. I don't know that we can call the United States prudish, considering its president has affairs with American porn stars, but we can certainly call the United States more conservative and more nationalist. So I think that the British Empire is a good model for thinking through what's happening. If you leave today listening to me understanding one thing, I hope that it is this. China is a fundamentally weak country. It is very weak. If you talk to any Chinese expert, they will tell you that it is weak. They have no illusions that they are strong, that they are about to challenge the United States. There is a reason that Xi Jinping is purging the Communist Party and throwing leaders in jail, never to be seen again. Mao did the same thing. We're in the same type of universe right now. China is a very, very poor country. Dario mentioned this a little bit. Now, I wouldn't deny that China has become much richer than it used to be. It's been very impressive what China has done in the last 70 years. But as of last year, 500 million Chinese people still lived on less than $5 a day for their income. If you had 500 Italians living on 4 euros a day, I wonder what the Italian government might look like, right? China is incredibly weak. It's an incredibly poor country. China's military has made major strides in the last 2 decades. Dario even mentioned that the Chinese Navy has become a force to be reckoned with in the South China Sea. Pardon me if I yawn. China can't even contemplate invading Taiwan right now. It can't even contemplate being the master of the South China Sea, let alone trying to challenge the United States for maritime power in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific. We're still talking about very narrow issues when we talk about China. Nevertheless, I don't want you to think that I underestimate the balance of power between the United States and China. It has certainly changed. Just because I think the United States is more powerful than China, and just because I am not hysterical about the threat that China poses to the United States, does not mean that I don't recognize that China is much more powerful, and that China in the long term is very ambitious, and does want to pose a challenge in the long term to United States interests. China's going to have a lot of trouble doing this, though. For one thing, China has no allies. Okay, fine, they have North Korea, but that's it. They have no allies. Think for a second about how many allies the United States has just off the top of your head. Great Britain, Australia, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, probably India we could throw in there, although we're having some problems with India, right? China has nobody that it can call on if it's in trouble like that. It has nobody besides North Korea for whose defense it is responsible. This is a much weaker power than the United States. I think it is dangerous to think in terms of it as being as powerful as the United States. I think it is dangerous to think of this as a new Cold War. I think that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We may yet get there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there. And this gets me back to where I started, and that is Belt and Road. And everybody is thinking about Belt and Road, and it is lucky that we're talking about this today because you all are thinking about Belt and Road because your government is thinking about the Belt and Road Initiative. And look, does the United States have a problem with Italy taking money from a foreign country, investment for infrastructure? No. The United States, it's not the United States' business who you take investment from for infrastructure. The United States should not be telling anybody who they take investment from for infrastructure. The United States built a liberal world order around countries doing what was most prosperous and most in their interest, with a minimum amount of interference from the United States. The reason that people fear China is because if you look at Chinese history, when China intervenes somewhere, China tries to dominate. China controlled most of Asia at one point. China invaded Vietnam and wanted to conquer Vietnam. China did all of it. China literally views itself as the center of the universe, the Middle Kingdom. That is the full sort of manifestation of Chinese power when it's at its height. The United States doesn't want to do that. The United States doesn't want to control everywhere. What the United States wants is to make sure that those oceans are clear, that trade can happen, and that everybody plays by the United States' rules, and those rules should be in everybody's interests. If the United States starts going around and lecturing people and being self-righteous about how, no, you can't take money from this, and you can't take money from this, and no, you're not allowed to do this, but you can only come to America and only trade with us, and everything is make America great again, then countries might actually look to countries like China or Russia for true alliances. So one belt, one road, whatever. If you want to take some money from the Chinese, I wouldn't do it. There are better companies out there. I think there are countries like the United States that might give you a better deal, but fine. It's none of our business. The problem is if a country like Italy or a country like Greece or anybody else turns to China and wants China to make the rules. The problem comes if a country decides that it wants to be an ally of China. The problem comes if a country like Italy decides that it wants its sons and daughters to fight in conflicts to make sure that China can be a global power. I have not met a thinking person in the West who wants such a thing, right? We're all in the realm of economics here. There are no wars, and there isn't some great superpower Cold War happening right now, and I wish that we would stop talking about it as such. The United States has a major problem. It has a major enemy. That enemy is itself, and it's a very, very, very powerful enemy, but I just want to sort of put in perspective what this relationship is with China, and we'll talk about Russia in a second, and say that yes, there are problems, and yes, there are areas of confrontation, and yes, there are places where we disagree, but we are not yet at some kind of superpower conflict, and we are certainly not at a place where somebody decides to get funding to build a bridge from is the arbiter of whether you're in or out of the American alliance. Thank you.
Grazie Jacob per questa tua serafica visione dei rapporti fra Stati Uniti e Cina. Lascio la parola immediatamente al professor Yao Ji, che invece ci darà la sua visione dei rapporti evidentemente tra Pechino e Washington.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Limas, for inviting me here. This is my first public speech in Italy. I'm very excited and nervous a little bit as well. But anyway, I will share my view with you on the topic of the strategic triangular between China, Russia, and the United States. I did not shape my speech in way of the previous speaker on the pattern of bilateral relationship. I put the bilateral relationship between China and Russia and China and the United States in the strategic triangular context. But I will, of course, elaborate on the bilateral relationship, the two pairs of bilateral relationship between China and the US and China and Russia in due course. Firstly, the strategic triangular. In this world, we have a number of trilateral interactions or frameworks, but only one of them can qualify as a strategic triangular. That is the triangular between China, US, and Russia, the top three military powers, and the number one and number two economic powers. In the Cold War, this triangular relationship was the determinant for the end of the Cold War. And after the end of the Cold War, this concept has not been very used because we did not really recognize the emergence of another cycle of the strategic triangular. But today we are talking about this. So my first question is whether there is really a re-emergence of the strategic triangular between the three powers. First of all, I would say not really. Maybe it is too early to talk about the re-emergence of this concept, but we do see such a trend that China and Russia has gone much closer with the United States. And this trend is visible especially in the security area that cannot be ignored. Now, let's say if the trend becomes a reality, that will impose upon the world a lot of uncertainties. One of the uncertainties, for example, is how the middle powers position themselves in the two giants, like Canadians and Australians do, when they are caught in the crossfire between China and the United States. They have to be very, very careful. Now, this comes to the question of Italian official endorsement of the Belt and Road policy. That is music to ears as far as the Chinese leaders are concerned. On the other hand, how this is calculated and considered by, for example, the EU countries or the United States. People ask me the question, how the middle power should position themselves in such a strife between the two giants. Always say, okay, play the game and the calculation of having the cake and eat it too, which means that you can continue your alliance relationship with the United States. That's ultimate security guarantee. At the same time, you can take a lot of commercial and lucrative benefits from continuing and enhancing trade with China. Now, in between these two, now you have to place your national interest above anything else. So that is the answer of mine to such questions in the past to many people in the rank of middle powers. Now, I would like to raise a second question about whether 2 against 1 continue to be a winning formula in the triangular interaction. The answer is still not necessarily. Of course, China and Russia, China and the Soviet Union suffered a lot by taking the so-called double adversary strategy in the Cold War era. Eventually, China changed its position and allied itself with the United States. And the Soviet Union broke down as a result of the double adversary strategy. But this time, we see the United States took the double adversary strategy, although from the position of strength. But whether this is a rational policy choice or choice of a best strategy, Dr. Kissinger advised Trump many times that if you embark on a road against the two major powers, two top powers in the world, even if you have a lot of allies behind you, that is still a lesser, we call the wise choice. Now, if you can have the good relationship between the either powers, why not say this time the triangular relationship is not comparable with that one in the Cold War. It was because it was fluid and stable, largely because, for example, neither Russia nor China would like to take a confrontational or irreversible confrontational strategy against the United States. In the last 2 decades, we see numerous times whenever there is an opportunity of reciting relationship with Russia by the United States, Russians will jump on board, and the eagerness to reset the relationship is very obvious. I think in the last few years, we see a few times that Russians try to improve relationship with the United States whenever there was a sign of reconciliation, either from the mouth of Trump or from the strategic reality. But having said that, now let's come to my talk on the part of my understanding of Sino-US relationship. Now this is a great time to talk about it, as the bilateral relationship has registered a free fall in the last few years. We are worried that the bilateral relationship will continue to worsen to the point of direct confrontation. Now that has been the result since the U.S., the White House announced the National Defense Strategy and National Security Strategy, which for the first time and officially identified China as the adversary. Although in the paper it said strategic competitor, but we all know it means enemy anyway. So here, to the worries of the Chinese, this ended the strategic debate among American elites of the last 3 decades, how to assess China, how to identify China or depict China, whether as a stakeholder assisting American global leadership or a peer strategic rival. Now, we have the answer. The answer is clear. That is, China is a strategic rival opposing American interests. As such, we see probably policies of containment to follow this strategic depiction by the 2 reports, 2 strategies. Although this is a kind of policy, this is not a policy of complete containment. Containment will be pursued in certain strategic areas, such as military or such as the economic and trade. We have already seen the evolutionary course towards confrontation in these 2 areas. First, we see the bilateral relationship has become militarized, and also not only militarized, but also combatized. We call the militarization has reached a level of combat level, especially in the South China Sea. So I'll share with you one example. On the 31st of September last year, the two navies, the 2 ships had the near collision in the South China Sea when the U.S. warship conducted the freedom of navigation operations within the 12 nautical miles of a Chinese claimed island. When the Chinese came to shadow the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Navy issued the electronic warfare against Chinese warship and partially paralyzed the Chinese command system. Now, this is a sinister development in the sense that this has been the first direct combat engagement between the 2 militaries since the end of the Vietnam War. So that points to the direction that accidental exchange of fire is not unthinkable. So when there is accidental exchange of fire, that would lead to open-ended military confrontation, the consequences, I don't like to think about it. Another is, of course, the Cold War in high-tech or telecommunication sector, the ban of Huawei in US and the push of the US to pressure the allies and the partner not to use Huawei. Now, this is certainly, from the Chinese perspective, high-tech and communication Cold War, and of course, it's part of the containment policy. Although it is not complete, the comprehensive containment in certain areas, they do look like that. Finally, yeah. Now, the Chinese response, as far as I see, still the continuation of non-confrontational policy toward the United States. That policy was set by Deng Xiaoping and is continued by Xi Jinping. Fundamentally, a workable relationship with the U.S. is the cornerstone of overall Chinese foreign policy. Without a good relationship or even workable relationship with the United States, it's very difficult for China to conduct meaningful and beneficial relationship with all American allies, as simple as that. So for the Chinese government, it is the policy that to avoid the showdown or breakup until the last minute, until they cannot avoid it. So this is number one Chinese response. Secondly, no alliance with Russia, as I mentioned very clearly in the beginning. Alliance with Russia against the United States in this triangular interaction would mean a very confrontational enterprise, very confrontational measure against some fundamental U.S. interests. I don't think China would like to do that. I will talk about Sino-Russian relationship, which is not alliance, but comprehensive strategic partnership, which bears some signs of alliance building, but overall it is partnership, not alliance. Finally, I would like to say in the trilateral interaction, the heavier the U.S. pressure on both countries, the closer the two countries, China and Russia, would move together. So that's another outcome for them to resist the common pressure from the United States, a more powerful state.
Grazie. Grazie al professor Youji che ci ha dato una visione perlomeno più frastagliata dei rapporti fra Stati Uniti e Cina. Adesso invece la parola al professor Dmitry Suslov, che in questo suo primo intervento di 15 minuti si concentrerà sulle relazioni tra Washington e Mosca. Prego.
Grazie Dario, grazie a tutti, buongiorno. First, let me join my co-panelists in thanking Lucio and Limes in general and translators for having us. Yes, I was asked first to talk about Russian relations with the United States, and then in the second round, Russia's relations with China and how Russia manages the Chinese rise. Before moving precisely to our vision, to my vision of the US policy and US-Russia relations, let me say that the strategic triangle that we're talking about now, the US-China-Russia relations, will certainly change. And in 10, 15 years from now, there will be fundamental changes, A, in terms of the substance of relations between these three powers, and secondly, even in terms of the number of angles of that geographical or geometrical structure that we are talking about. And probably we will have the quadrangle with India also assuming the global role, acquiring the global great power role. And rather, I think we will talk about a trapezium rather than a triangle, trapezium with the United States and China being the top powers and Russia and India being explicitly more secondary to them. And of course, with the current pace of Russian economic development and demographic challenges, Russia simply cannot keep the pace. even in the military field. You know, today, nuclear preponderance over everyone else except the United States, conventional military effectiveness of Russia that you see in Syria, and a proactive diplomacy, which you also see in the Middle East and also in Asia Pacific, are still the factors that keep Russia in the first tier of great powers, despite its economic and demographical weaknesses. However, in my view, Russia will not be able to keep the current military preponderance over China in 15-20 years, and Russia will lose the status of exclusive counterpart of the United States in strategic stability field, which is a revolutionary change for and a revolutionary challenge for Russian great power ambitions, but that's life, and we can't do anything with this. Now to the relations within the strategic triangle, which so far exists, and the US policy towards Russia. So what do we have now? Now we have very sharp, but less long-term confrontation between the US and Russia. Less sharp so far, but much more long-term and strategic confrontation between the US and China. And unprecedented great power partnership, not alliance, but partnership between Russia and China. But I will leave the Russia and China for the second round. This state of relations is also very temporary and interim, because at the core of these relations and at the heart of the US confrontation with Russia, in our view, in my view, is the extremely painful and difficult US adaptation to the world, which started to develop contrary to American ideological assumptions, historical narratives, and national interests. A world which the United States can no longer determine or control. And much of this, not all, but much of this is related to Russia and China, who refused to develop according to the US preferences domestically and started to challenge the American leadership internationally. Thus, in the near and middle-term future, confrontational policy towards Russia and towards China will remain a central feature of the US foreign policy, well beyond Donald Trump administration. It's not related to Trump. Due to ideological, geopolitical, and historical reasons, the United States simply cannot accept Russia and China as legitimate independent great powers, as legitimate, right? The US does regard China as great power, but not a legitimate one, and does not regard Russia as either great power or legitimate, right? The US cannot accept Russia and China as equal co-authors and co-managers of joint international order, not the US-centric international order managed and established by the United States, but a joint international order established jointly by several great powers. Inside the United States, there is bipartisan consensus about the necessity to confront and contain Russia and China. And this is one of the very few things that Democrats and Republicans agree with each other. Democrats want to punish Moscow for the election of Donald Trump. They consider Russian foreign policy as trying to undermine democracies all over the world and in the United States in particular, thus describing Russia basically as existential threat, right? Because if you want to change domestic regime, it means you are existential threat. And the Democrats claim that the US shouldn't and mustn't reject confrontational policy towards Russia unless the Russian regime is transformed and Russian foreign policy fundamentally changes. Republicans consider Russia mainly as geopolitical challenge as of now, lesser than China, but still an important geopolitical challenge. Now, the Trump administration and many realists in the United States obviously regard China, not Russia, as the major strategic challenge, and lots of them speculated about partial rapprochement between the US and Russia in order to distance Russia from China and to prevent the emergence of the Russian-Chinese entente, I would say, against the United States. But this doomed to fail. This doomed to fail. First, because of the Russiagate, Russia became a very important instrument, the major instrument in the hand of Democrats in the United States to undermine Trump. And in general, Russia became a very important instrument of American domestic politics, and this prevents any positive development, any. That, you know, Putin and Trump simply cannot meet, and they will not meet, I think, for a full-fledged summit, at least in general, because, I mean, the next possibility of meetings between them is only when Trump is re-elected, if Trump is re-elected in 2020. So Russiagate prevents any engagement. And secondly, Russia would not sacrifice its relations with China for the sake of containing China together with the United States. Finally, the majority in the US foreign policy elite is convinced that even simultaneous confrontation with Russia and China will be successful. They view US power as still vastly preponderant over Chinese and especially Russian ones. The US-led international order as still strong and attractive to the majority of states. We've just heard from Jeremy that China is weak and lacks allies, whereas the US system of allies and partners is still pretty strong. Moreover, the US consider Russia as weak, declining, and quite fragile country, and Russia's relations with the non-West, especially with China, as a sort of marriage of convenience, which is doomed to deteriorate sooner rather than later. Thus, Russia is expected to withdraw from this confrontation with the US on the American terms quite soon, not least because of the alleged Russian fear of China, which will leave China basically alone and encircled by unfriendly powers. As a result, from our perspective, the United States seems to regard prevailing over Russia as a necessary prerequisite for eventual victory over China. And I define the US-Russian relations today and in the middle-term prospect as a new Cold War. A very fundamentally different from the previous Cold War, but still the new Cold War, because simply I can't call the US-Russian relations as peace. It is anything but peace. It is really a war, but through other means, with both sides regarding each other as adversaries, as malevolent actors, considering themselves to be at the right side of history, and both sides very unlikely to overcome this confrontation unless the other side undergoes fundamental change of its foreign policy. And in the Russian case, in the case of the US policy towards Russia, unless Russia undergoes a change of domestic regime. That's basically much more than a typical great power competition. We do not have, a typical great power competition assumes mixed relations with cooperation and confrontation. We do not have that in US-Russian relations. We have the agenda of relations fully determined by the logic of confrontation. And we will have that in the next several years. However, in the long-term prospect, in our understanding, the US will have to reject confrontational policies towards Russia and China, accept them as legitimate independent great powers outside of the US-led international order, and build relations with them on the basis of joint creation and joint management of new international order. Why? Because Russia and China are much more resilient than the US assumes. Expectations of the Russian-Chinese rivalry and the Russian fear of China is simply false. The majority of the US allies and partners do not support further escalation of tensions and of confrontation, and avoid choosing between the sides. So the more the US pressures its allies and partners, the less successful and influential is the United States. Germany, Turkey, and South Korea could be cited as the typical examples of this. And finally, the US undergoes a fundamental internal change. The US is in the midst of very difficult, not just external, but also internal transformation. And with less support for neoliberalism in both Republican and Democratic parties, The new US foreign policy consensus, which will inevitably emerge in the next decade, this new US foreign policy consensus will not necessarily demand that the US-led international order becomes global and universal, and that the US remains the major pillar of international security and the major producer of global public goods. Thus, from our perspective, the US will accept a role of one of the poles of the multipolar system, and one of co-authors and one of co-managers of a joint, not US-led, but joint international order. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, the US lacks such a historical experience because, you know American history, they jumped from isolationism to hegemonism, from staying outside of international order to becoming the center of international order of their own. And now they are moving into terra incognita in terms of the US role in the international system. This adaptation contradicts the US universalist ideology. It contradicts to the idea of the end of history, but it is inevitable. As it is inevitable for Russia to accept the role of the second tier country, it is inevitable for the United States also to accept the realities of multipolarity. And as soon as this adaptation is complete, we will see different US relations with China and different US relations with Russia, competitive but mixed. A typical pattern of great power relations. What does it mean for US-Russia relations and Russian policy vis-a-vis the United States? It means that the period until 2024, at least, will probably be the apex of the US confrontation with Russia. We will see further increase of sanctions, dismantlement of the remnants of arms control, the new wave of arms race, no strategic dialogue between Russia and the United States, and so on and so forth. Again, American domestic politics, consensus on Russia as adversary, conviction that Russia is extremely fragile and easy to be defeated. All these factors allow no alternative to further confrontation. Nothing positive can be expected in US-Russian relations as long as Donald Trump remains in the office because of this Russiagate affair. If a mainstream Democrat wins in 2020, the US policy, confrontational policy towards Russia will change in terms of nuances, but largely remain as such. And the Democratic administration will have less emphasis on arms race, but more on sanctions and bashing Putin's regime. However, if Russia withstands by that time, the US policy since 2025 might start changing. The US is likely indeed by that time to look for rapprochement with Russia in order to strengthen containment of China, and even if it doesn't, the eventual inevitable adaptation of the US to a multipolar world would compel the US to reject confrontational policies towards Russia in any case, especially towards Russia, which is not a peer rival to the US. Thus, in order to succeed, and the Russian policy towards the United States is also, not a policy of compromise, but a policy of basically winning in this new confrontation. And in order to succeed in this great power confrontation with the United States, Russia basically needs what Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov described as strategic patience. We need to withstand the next 6 years, which will be mostly difficult, perhaps more, but still, we need to withstand. We need to avoid uncontrollable escalation and direct military clash with the United States within this period. And finally, 3, we need to accelerate what we regard as inevitable US adaptation to the realities of multipolarity. What does it mean? It means keeping and strengthening strategic partnership with China, and I will talk about that later. Greater flexibility and more proactive initiatives on the Russian side towards the US allies in Europe and Asia. So Russia is interested in improving the relations with Europe and Japan, both for its own sake and for the sake of compelling the US to overcome the current confrontation with with Russia. So I will stop for now and then turn to the Russian policy towards China in the second round. Thank you.
Grazie professor Suslov, mi sembra ci sia già accordo tra i nostri due ospiti cinese e russo sul fatto che non si tratti di un'alleanza fra Mosca e Pechino, ma ce ne parleranno più tardi. Invece chiedo a Jacob Shapiro adesso di spiegarci in 10 minuti al massimo, capisco che non è un compito semplice, quali siano le relazioni tra Stati Uniti e Russia e soprattutto se ci rispondi sulla visione di Suslov di un mondo multipolare che tra pochissimi anni, peraltro, gli Stati Uniti dovranno necessariamente accettare.
Okay, 10 minutes. This is a good panel because I think all three of us up here actually disagree quite a bit. And I disagree with a few things that Dmitry just said. Number one, and I said it when I first started, I don't think this is a Cold War. I think it's wrong to think of it that way. There are no battles being fought. There's nobody dying in proxy conflicts around the world. The Cold War was a very serious, very hostile, very violent war. I actually view it as somewhat optimistic and pragmatic that the United States and Russia basically worked together in the Middle East to take down the Islamic State. It was not open, it was not friendly, we didn't have meetings where people took pictures and things like that. But the United States and Russia worked together in order to get rid of the Islamic State, and now they're trying to figure out where to go next. The second thing, and Dmitry said this, and I find this from China as well, that Russia and China want to be respected by the United States as legitimate and independent powers. I don't speak for the US government, but you are legitimate and independent powers, and the United States would never presume to tell you any differently. What the United States doesn't want is for Russia and China to do things against, not just against US interests, but that are aggressive. So if we're talking about Russia, the issue is not Russiagate, it's not Russian intervention in US electoral politics. The United States has been intervening in Soviet and Russian politics for a long time. Russia's been interfering in ours. I assume that we will keep doing this dance for as long as we're both standing. The issue with Russia is mostly Eastern Europe, and that is that Russia does not view Ukraine as a legitimate and independent power, and that Russia does not view Belarus, let's say, as a legitimate and independent power, and the United States does. So if Russia would be willing to say, okay, we're not going to go after Ukraine, like we're done, like Crimea is it, I think you would find a United States that would be much more friendly to Russian interests. If you go back to the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton wanted good relationships with Russia. George Bush looked into Putin's eyes and saw his soul, and he was a good man, right? The Obama administration had that little stupid reset button where they were going to reset Russia-US relations. That didn't work either. It hasn't worked under the Trump administration. It's not because of Russiagate, and thankfully it's not because of any kind of global ideological battle between capitalism and communism. It is that the United States does not recognize Russia's interests in Eastern Europe and wants to push Russia back. And for as long as that is the case, you will have confrontation and you'll have disagreement between the two sides. I spoke a little bit about history when I started. I just want to bring it back there for a second because sometimes I think it's dangerous to think in terms of Russia, China, the United States as the future of geopolitics. Again, if you go back to the 1850s, the West was very worried about what China would look like when it arose. If you go back and read newspaper articles at the end of the 1800s, the early 1900s, you have thinkers in the West worrying about the rise of China even then, right? Also in the 1850s, the British Empire was very worried about the rise of the Russian Empire. This was the so-called Great Game, where they were competing for Central Asia. The Brits were very afraid that Russia was going to try and steal India out from underneath them. You had the Crimean War, which was basically a British-led coalition against the Russian Empire to prevent Russia from controlling Crimea. Suddenly, it's not a coincidence that Crimea is back in the news today, right? We're kind of reliving this period in history. What happened 70 years later? It wasn't the rise of Russia or the rise of China that defined geopolitics, it was the reunification of Germany. Nobody was talking about the reunification of Germany at the beginning of the 1800s. But that single geopolitical fact was more important than the grand strategic triangles that you could see in the moment at any one particular time. So I just caution us to say that usually the biggest changes in geopolitics are not what you expect. They are not the things that are in front of you. I said this about China. I said China is a weak country. Russia is weaker. Russia's economy is dependent on oil. There's too much oil in the market. Dmitry already alluded to their demographics. They're disastrous. Putin is having to impose more of a dictatorship in Russia because there's going to be domestic opposition to the Russian government. If you look at all the opinion polls, the trust in the Russian government is going down. Trust in Putin is going down. Just this year, they're raising taxes on Russian citizens while lowering their pension benefits. This is not a way into the hearts and minds of the Russian people, if you want. So Russia has a lot of problems going forward. When the United States deals with Russia, I actually think long-term what the United States faces is what to do with a weakening Russia. What does the world look like if Russia is incredibly weak? What do all those Russian nuclear weapons look like if the regime in Moscow is not capable of securing them or of containing the entire country? A lot of people talk about the Russia-China alliance or unprecedented strategic partnership, whatever you want to say. I think the Chinese remember full well that at the end of the 1800s, Russia conquered large parts of what were China. China would like that land back. China has problems with the United States because the United States is preventing China from rejoining Taiwan to the mainland, of becoming the dominant power in the South China Sea. Russia is a reminder to China of the past where empires divided up its territory and did whatever it wanted to China. This Chinese regime, it started with Mao and it goes to Deng and you can trace the line all the way to Xi. It's all about restoring the strength and independence of the Chinese people. And Russia controlling significant amounts of what was Chinese territory in the East is a permanent reminder that China used to be weak and that China over time will have to get it back. When we think about the One Belt, One Road initiative, right, I talked about that earlier. Much more threatening to Russia than it is to the United States, because China is talking about becoming the dominant power in the Central Asian sphere of influence. And that has been Russian now for something like 200 years. The United States isn't going in and trying to be the dominant power on the ground in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and all of these countries, which, if you're Eurasian, is supremely important. To wrap it up, because I don't want to go too long, I have the 10 minutes, but look, the United States does not want to stop China from being China. It doesn't want to stop Russia from being Russia. It's not about that. It's about maintaining a liberal world order that has been set up to try and protect all of these different spheres of influence. And I think fundamentally, when the United States comes into conflict with China and when it comes into conflict with Russia, it's when both of those countries are impinging upon that order. I don't think that Russia and China are going to be able to make common cause in the end, but the overarching U.S. grand strategy is to make sure that there is not one dominant power in Eurasia. And for as long as there is China and there is Russia, there is no dominant power really in Eurasia. I don't see the Russians can threaten to be that, and I don't see that the Chinese can threaten to be that either. So yes, the United States will try to define its interests. It will protect its allies. We'll make sure that Russia can't spill over into Ukraine. We'll make sure that China can't spill over into Taiwan. And most importantly, we'll make sure that there isn't one power that emerges that can create this multipolar world that you're talking about. I don't see it happening. I see that, I don't know what some people talk about a unipolar world and a multipolar world. Unipolar being that there's one power that is stronger than the rest. Multipolar being that there are a number of different powers that balance against each other. I don't think that the U.S. thinks in those terms. I think the U.S. thinks of itself as at the top of a liberal world order that provides defense and prosperity to any country that wants to join it. The Chinese and Russians will, if they want to join it and if they want to play by the rules, they're more than welcome to, and if not, they will find themselves on the outside, isolated, and they won't be able to challenge the order in the first place. So I don't see that as multipolar.
Shapiro ha risposto in maniera molto netta alla mia domanda e soprattutto all'affermazione di Dmitry Suslov. Adesso la parola al professor Yu per altri 10 minuti in cui invece ci spiegherà come Pechino guarda a Mosca oggi.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I think I share Dr. Suslov's speech, most of your points do not find anything that is disagreeable. On China's side, how they look at the relationship between China and Russia, they have a strategic depiction, the so-called comprehensive strategic partnership. This is a very interesting relationship or depiction in the sense that this nature of the partnership serves the two countries well. First of all, it doesn't give the two countries any pressure to act. For example, as an ally, you have to defend your allies in military confrontation, which can be very costly. Now, in a way, without alliance, to me, can be a plus rather than a liability. Alliance can be a liability when you look at from particular angles. Here, it's a relatively loose form of alignment. The two sides can seek opportunities without taking overt responsibility to protect the other. So at a strategic level, we see the partnership serves the two countries well in the sense that for Russia, it allows Moscow to concentrate on Europe and the Middle East with a minimum, for example, number of soldiers deployed in the Far East. During the Cold War era, we all know the Soviet Union collapsed because of economic problems. To deploy one soldier in the Far East, Russian Far East, was 3 times more expensive than a soldier deployed in the European theater. Now, a good relationship with China could free the Russians from repeating this kind of economic burden. For China, it frees China for the first time in 300 years of a worry that a land invasion from the north. So that is tremendous. We call the dividend of the end of the Cold War. China continued to benefit from that. On the whole, the political foundation for this partnership can be seen from the following point. First, no outstanding problems between the two countries, like territorial disputes, based on shared interests, especially common resistance to pressure from the West and the United States. In a way, enemy is enemy, so on and so forth. And structural mutual interest in the world of diplomacy. So here we see Russian support to China's position towards the Sangaku Diaoyu dispute, and China's support to Russia sometimes in UN settings, for example, over the vote on Syria in the last year. And finally, we see the very stable and institutionalized summit arrangement between the two top leaders. I think Putin and Xi Jinping met 11 times last year. So that was a remarkable number for them to maintain the very close contact. Now, I would like to mention the shift gradually from being an ordinary or normal partnership to something that is more than that. China has strategic partnership with several dozen countries, but with Russian one that is quite unique. That is especially true in the last few years when the Chinese side emphasized more on the word strategic than the word of partnership. Now, China and Japan could not reach a strategic depiction. When China wanted to have a strategic relationship with Japan, Japan said no. Why? Because in Japanese mind, strategic means security and defense cooperation. So in the last few years, the two countries emphasized more on the security and the defense cooperation as a result of the tightened U.S. military pressure on both countries. On China, for example, in the South China Sea. On Russia, we see the U.S. penetration into the area such as the Baltic Sea or Black Sea, where the United States were very reluctant to do it just 5 years ago. So we see this kind of progress from the NATO to enlarge eastward expansion and the tightened US pressure. They moved the two countries militarily because they feel general partnership does not serve the two countries' fundamental interests. One, the NATO and the United States specify the military pressure as the most effective means of pressure to gain strategically with the two countries. So here we see concrete examples of this movement from ordinary partnership to strategic partnership in terms of security and military cooperation. For example, I was very surprised to learn that the Russian Navy and the Chinese Navy conducted anti-submarine warfare, very sophisticated anti-submarine warfare drills. Now we all know Americans only conduct this kind of warfare with allies. Now we see the very catered, specific the arms sales and military R&D programs between the two countries, such as intercontinental missiles and space programs, cyber military cooperation projects, and so on and so forth. And we see the Chinese participation in Russian military army exercises last year at the military regime level. Now China sent a whole mechanized brigade to participate in this military exercise for the first time since probably the beginning of the PRC. So these movements now sometimes convince me that they do not talk about ordinary partnership, but they don't want to talk about the military cooperation and alliance, sub-alliance arrangement. Either they want to keep it relatively quiet, but they are going to do it and continually as a common measure and against the tightened US pressure.
Grazie.
Oh, sorry, could I just?
Sure.
Just 1 minute. But we also see the other side of the bilateral relationship. For example, there is no common ideological foundation between the two countries. Real and potential conflicts of interest, such as in Central Asia and in Russian Far East, unpleasant historical encounters, potential and current rivalry, the third-party factor like the United States and so on and so forth. Therefore, alliance, no, because of this. But the question is whether, in 1993, when I started to teach in the university, I used the word strategic relationship of convenience. I told my students that this kind of relationship do not last. However, we see very long-lasting this kind of relationship of convenience between China and Russia, 25 years now, and it's going on. So the question is really why this kind of partnership of convenience continue to last. Thank you.
Grazie al professor Yu che ci ha spiegato, rispondendo di fatto a Jacob Shapiro, che non ci sono contese territoriali, ad esempio tra Cina e Russia, e che la ragione della vicinanza tra i due paesi è strettamente di interesse, quindi strettamente geopolitica e non ideologica. Chiedo in conclusione, per gli ultimi 10 minuti, invece a Dmitry Suslov di darci la sua visione di ciò che capita in Cina nei confronti della Russia, visto da Mosca.
Thank you. Before I do that, let me just in 1 minute react to some very valid points that Jacob identified. First, about the Cold War. Of course, the US-Russian relations today is not a continuation of the previous Cold War. I mean, the world fundamentally changed, and Russia fundamentally changed. However, it is not a classical great power rivalry either. It is a new Cold War. Why do I use the new Cold War, and why I think it is applicable? Because in my understanding, the Cold War is a state of relations. It's not a description of the international system, right? It's not a structure. It's not bipolarity, multipolarity. I mean, it's not like that. It's not ideological animosity, which was a very important feature of the previous Cold War, but lacks today. As for proxy wars, by the way, we do have proxy wars. In the Russian perspective, Ukraine is a proxy war between Russia and the United States. Syria, the same thing. But ultimately, Cold War is the state of relations. And I will even give a definition of what I consider the Cold War. It is a sharply adversarial relations with both sides pursuing victory over the opponent rather than compromise and reconciliation. It is a confrontation which is unlikely to end unless one of the sides or both undergo fundamental transformation of their foreign policy, place and role in the international system, and even, as in the case of the US policy towards Russia, transformation of domestic regime. But at the same time, both sides avoiding direct military clash and refusing to consider war, hot war, against each other as a desirable means to achieve their objective. If you use that definition, it is absolutely matches the current state of the relations between Russia and the United States. Second point, the nature of conflict between Russia and the US is not about Ukraine and East Europe. It is about international order. It is systemic. It is about the basic rules, norms of international order, such as what is sovereignty, what are legitimate national interests of great powers, what is independent foreign policies of post-Soviet countries, what are the rules of great power relations, what should be the rules of the use of force in the world, and so on and so forth. It is the conflict about the roles and places that Russia and the US occupy in the international system. It is not just about East Europe. Third point, Jacob said that we worked together against the Islamic State. In fact, we didn't. We worked against each other in Syria, unfortunately. And that's very illustrative of US-Russian relations. Despite having a common enemy, we worked against each other. And the only cooperation that took place between us in Syria was basically the confliction. So we did destroy deterritorialize Islamic State in parallel, not in cooperation. And the dialogue between Moscow and Washington was about avoiding direct military clash between the two. No coordination of anti-ISIS. And the fourth point, of course, I wouldn't describe the Russian regime as dictatorship. Yes, it is not democratic, but dictatorship is too much. And I won't exaggerate the scale of decline of the support of Putin's regime in Moscow. After all, come on, it's the decline from 86% to about 60%. I won't describe the 60% support for Putin in Russia as, a fundamental crisis of the regime. It's a normalization of the support ratings, provided, yes, some economic troubles, provided that we passed from the positive effects of Crimea in the past and so on and so forth, but I see no fundamental crisis of the regime. Now, China and the Russian management of relations with China. Today, of course, the Russian-Chinese partnership is the best great power relations both sides have. That's the first thing that we need to keep in mind. There are no better great power relations for China. There are no better great power relations for Russia. Secondly, it's a unique pattern of great power relations in the history and current practice of international relations. Despite we are neighbors and we share a common neighborhood, Central Asia, despite we are not military allies and we are not going to become military allies, there is no zero-sum game in Russian-Chinese relations over the shared neighborhood. Russia is the only country which is not afraid of China and is not afraid of the rise of China. Both sides promote their interests in Eurasia in a win-win way without undermining the core interests and policy initiatives of the other. And the prominent example is convergence between the Eurasian Economic Union and One Belt, One Road. Why do we have such positive and unique pattern of great power relations? Why do we lack zero-sum game? First and foremost, because China is behaving vis-à-vis Russia in a tremendously smart way, the smartest policy vis-à-vis Russia of all. Basically, China manages the asymmetry between Russia and China instead of exploiting and emphasizing this asymmetry. China is basically providing Russia politically and psychologically what the West failed to provide us in the post-Cold War period. Great power status, diplomatic equality, joint management of common neighborhood, joint management and joint creation of regional order. Indeed, China doesn't want international order in Central Asia and Eurasia as such to be China-centric. It does not pressure, for instance, Kazakhstan to choose between Eurasian Economic Union and China. It does not insist on Russia and Central Asia to transform according to the Chinese model, and so on. So it behaves in a tremendously smart way. Secondly, Russia objectively needs China and needs positive relations with China. We're increasingly dependent on China economically. China is the major trading partner for Russia with about 16% of Russian trade turnover. Russian-Chinese trade today is about 2 times bigger than the Russian-German trade, also to keep in mind. The volume is about 108 billion US dollars. Security, from the security perspective, relations with such a neighboring giant as China, with whom we share the second longest border for Russia, is a matter of survival for Russia. Simply a matter of survival. Russia's relations with China have a value of their own. They are not determined by the conjuncture of the Russian relations with the West. And even when Russia's relations with the West improve, Russia will not, of course, turn its back towards China or downgrade the form and substance of its relations with Beijing. We simply have a very core indigenous interest in having partnership with China, and we should not underestimate the scale of our dependence on China. Deterioration of Russian-Chinese relations might hypothetically happen if China starts conducting a hegemonic policy towards Russia and starts treating Russia as a junior partner. In this case, yes, Russia would be compelled to resist. However, such a turn in the Chinese foreign policy is unlikely. Why? First, because China is unlikely to exploit asymmetry with Russia, and more likely it will keep on managing them, creating the impression of diplomatic equality, showing respect to Russia, and so on and so forth. Because China, I think, understands very well that if it starts exploiting Russian weaknesses, as the West did in the 1990s and in 2000s, China will be trapped into a typical Thucydides trap. Everyone, including Russia, will consolidate against China. Today, Russia is not doing that, and this is very important for China as well. Secondly, as long as the US-China confrontation persists, Russia is safe. The fact that the US considers China, not Russia, as a strategic rival puts Russia in a very favorable position vis-à-vis both. And as I said in my first round, a sort of competition for Russia might start in 6 years from now, approximately 6 years from now, similar to the competition for India, which is going on already now. Even the gradual decline of Russian international status in comparison to China in the coming decades is unlikely to produce deterioration of relations. Yes, it will be very difficult for Russia from the psychological viewpoint. But, as I said, the scale of countries, the potential of countries is simply uncomparable, and we cannot change our demographics and economy. However, this relative decline of Russia will not produce deterioration of relations with China. Why? Because Russia is already managing the situation in such a way that would still allow Russia to be one of the major global players and preserve Russian strategic independence, also strategic independence vis-à-vis China, and preserve Russian status of a pole of the multipolar system. 2 factors that prove this, and I will close them. First, Russia already pursues balancing strategy in Eurasia and in the Pacific. and works hard, pretty hard, to strengthen relations with other centers of power in Asia-Pacific, India, Japan, ASEAN countries, while preserving strategic partnership with China. And with inevitable transformation of the US policy and ongoing transformation of Europe, Russia's relations with the West will also be improved, and strategic balance of Russian foreign policy in general will be restored in 6, maybe 10 years from now. And second tool that Russia uses to manage its decline vis-à-vis China, Greater Eurasia. Greater Eurasia is precisely the tool to manage the Chinese factor in the longer term, even after US-China confrontation. And the idea of Greater Eurasia is to multilateralize China in a system of regimes and relationships in Eurasia in such a way that it would make a Chinese unilateral hegemony impossible. Similar to the EU, in how the European Union is multilateralizing and transcending German power inside the EU. Yes, it will not be easy because China is not Germany. China also lacks the experience of multilateral relations and participating in these multilateral regimes. But the alternative is, again, China ultimately falling into the Thucydides trap. And ultimately, I think it is in the Chinese interest to accept this role of a core manager, co-creator, and co-designer of the Greater Eurasian multilateral regime together with Russia. Thank you very much.
Grazie professor Suslov, è certamente rilevante sentire descrivere la relazione tra Pechino e Mosca come la più importante relazione tra grandi potenze oggi nel pianeta, ed anche di aver lanciato un monito ai cinesi affinché non si comportino da egemoni nei confronti della Russia o la relazione si incepperà. So che Jacob Shapiro vuole rispondere veramente in un minuto a Dmitry Suslov e poi chiudiamo.
I guess I'll just say just a couple of points very briefly. That's fine on the Cold War, as long I just don't want to call it that because I think that's a bad omen. But I agree with you on the state of relations. On ISIS and on the Middle East, I think we haven't talked about anything China and Russia and the United States all have in common. They all have in common an opposition to radical Islam. And I think all of them deal with it in different ways. And I would be the first to say there wasn't coordination, but I think that is an interest that all three share. It is certainly one that in the grand scheme of things, I think Russia and the United States worked towards without even meaning to in the Middle East. Could have been better, could have been more coordinated, but I think it worked towards that. You were right that I shouldn't have just said Eastern Europe. I should have added the Caucasus to it. You're absolutely right that it's about international norms and sovereignty, and the moment that Russia decides that it wants to respect the international norm of sovereignty for Georgia and for Ukraine and for these other countries that the United States is worried about, fine, good. Just accept the principles of sovereignty that the United States wants. There'll be no problem. You talked about Putin and about dictatorship and 80% to 60%, but you also said there's 6 more bad years coming. We also know in the Russian political system what it looks like when you go from 60 to 40, right? It's not the same type of thing. If you have those 6 bad years, is somebody going to vote Putin out? I don't think that such a thing would happen. And I just want to close on, something that you said was that there's been a strategic partnership between Russia and China for 25 years, and that the resilience of that partnership is remarkable. There's been one between the United States and China for something like 60 years, and I think that one is pretty remarkable. And I thought that both of you put your finger right on the pulse of the issue, which is Greater Eurasia. That's the thing right there that scares the United States more than anything else. And as long as we're talking about Greater Eurasia and trying to unite Eurasia into a bloc against the United States, yeah, the United States is going to react very negatively. As to trying to form some kind of multilateral organization for Eurasia, look, Germany's military had to be destroyed for that to happen. Just leave it at that.
Grazie a Jacob Shapiro che invece ci ha fornito la linea rossa per eccellenza nelle relazioni tra Stati Uniti, Cina e Russia. Si conclude così questo eccezionale panel. Dopo di noi alle 12, quindi tra pochissimo, ci occuperemo di Italia ed euro. Introdurrà e modererà il mio collega Fabrizio Maronta, mentre vi ricordo che è in corso la visita guidata alla mostra di Laura Canali, l'Italia tutta intera. Per chi non fa in tempo questa mattina, l'appuntamento è anche per questo pomeriggio alle 17:30 e poi ancora domattina alle 11:30 e domani pomeriggio alle 17 per altre visite guidate. Grazie.
Thank you very much.